It's another milestone year for Ingrid Newkirk, who always has time to save an animal. In my birthday call, she gives us a global update on PETA's efforts, especially in India, which connects her to her youth. She also shares other obsessions, her favorite books, and a birthday meal. It's PETA President Ingrid Newkirk on the line, next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, it's a kind of tradition for us to talk to Ingrid Newkirk, the president and co-founder of PETA. And this year, we stopped counting years and talked about all the animals that still need to be saved all around the world. From Romania and Europe to the Philippines and Asia, Petra in the Middle East, and back to PETA headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia. PETA is having a global impact. We especially talk about India and how COVID has impacted PETA efforts there. But we talk about some fun things too, like her driving obsession and fondness for auto racing. Some books and movies too that she's enjoying, and what she's having for dinner on her birthday. Here's my conversation with PETA President and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk on the PETA Podcast. Happy birthday this year. In honor of your big day, PETA held this virtual event because we're still technically in the throes of COVID. It showcased the work of PETA's international rescue work, and we saw pictures of animals in dire circumstances in India, Romania, and the Philippines. And we'll get to those individual countries in a bit. But, PETA podcast listeners know a little bit about animal rahat in India because we've done a podcast show on that. But can you explain to listeners how PETA got into rescue work in the way it has and why it's so important to you?
Well, it's vital to us, Emil, and to everybody who cares about animals. We founded PETA because we wanted to draw attention to the four main areas in which animals suffer the greatest and are killed. And that, of course, is what people do with animals: to eat, to wear, to experiment upon. That's the big one, where the suffering is greatest for the longest. Eat is the numbers are the biggest. And then use in entertainment, for which there's absolutely no excuse. Elephants don't need to stand on their heads. Orcas don't need to be kept in pools. But what happens is, you look outside your window or in your neighborhood or someone tells you from another country about a cruelty that may involve dogs or cats or camels or horses, and you can't just turn away and say, well, we're trying to focus on the four main areas and nothing else. You try to incorporate the other bits and pieces too. So outside our office in Norfolk, Virginia, we have pockets of poverty, people living in trailers with no transportation, unemployment rates through the roof, and they have dogs that they use as guard dogs on chains outside in all weather. It's 91 degrees today, and they're out there, and in winter they're out there too, maybe with just a board up against the fence. So we thought, we can't turn a blind eye. We started to collect straw for bedding. We made dog houses. We have spay and neuter clinics that help people because they haven't the money for veterinary care. We even amputate limbs and do eye surgery for them all for nothing. And the same is true in other countries. We get a call that there's an earthquake in Mexico and it's all hands on deck. So we try to help. Or the Tall volcano in the Philippines, which you know about very well, is erupting and all the animals are on the island. And we think, well, we can't just get on with our other work. We also have to do something about that. And the same has happened in India, in Jordan, in Mexico, all over the place.
It's almost like you have to have an almost unlimited sense of empathy and compassion almost, though. I mean, because of the animals outside your door to the animals throughout the world. Does it ever get too much?
It's always too much because you can never do it all. I mean, it's like anybody working in any social cause. You were just in the Aegean stables with a teaspoon trying to clean it out. You do as much as you can, as often as you can, in as many places perhaps as you can. But each one you save. I mean, I hate to bring up that boring starfish story, is I can't save them all, but I can save this one and this one and this one. But really, it's true. There's nothing truer. Is that imagine if you were one and I saved you, or I were one and you saved me. I mean, what a wonderful thing we would think as individuals. And each individual is so glad to be saved, whether it's a cow who has a rope embedded in her neck on a street in a village in India, or it's a camel who's being beaten and starved and made to perform tricks in a traveling show, or it's, a dog who's fallen down into a well 60 feet deep, some of them in India, and can't get out, is injured, and is just waiting to die. And we hear about it, and we're able to rush out. Our guys are trained in rappelling down the sides of these ubiquitous wells and bringing the animals to safety. But you have to think, I'll do what I can, I'll do as much as I can. And luckily, so many of our members see the photographs, they see the videos, and they think, I want to be part of that. And so they are. Animal rights, animal welfare, it's all one big pool.
Yeah. Well, it does become our burden to relieve the burden that are put on the so-called beasts of burden. I mean, that is a phrase that came out of PETA's India work, helping these animals that were called beasts of burden, the bullocks, the donkeys, the horses who were forced to pull carts full of heavy materials like brick and wood and the like. Describe what life is like for these animals, because if people understand what daily life is for these animals, they may become closer to understanding why it's so important.
Yeah, it's vital. I mean, absolutely vital. I mean, in many of these countries, overseas, Asia, Africa, donkeys are not seen as really having any feelings. They're beaten to within an inch of their lives if they don't move fast enough, keep moving with enormous loads on their backs. And the same is true with the sugarcane factories in India. If you put sugar in a recipe or in your tea, remember the chances are it may have come from a sugarcane factory in Maharashtra, India. And that's where we work, where these poor bullocks, who are gentle, loving animals, their skin is as smooth as silk. They love to have their heads scratched. But they're not treated that way. Only at our sanctuary are they treated that way. They may have up to 4 tons of sugar cane loaded on a cart that they're pulling with a big log of wood around the yoke on their backs. And they strain at it all day. Their muscles ache all night. And if they are unable to move, if they hurt, if they hesitate, they not only get a whip that is often made with the skin, the hide of the bullock before them, who is no longer alive, on their back. They are no longer, they also get tugged with a rope that goes through their pierced nostrils to push them forward or hold them back. But they may get a stick put up into their rectums to make them go, good God, and move forward. This is their life. And when I take the train in India coming into the area we serve, it arrives just after dawn, and I sit there on the step of the train as it moves along the track towards our destination, and I see the smoke coming out of the huts of the villagers, and I see the bullocks sitting outside those huts, usually tied on a short rope to a stake. And I think, just you've got a few minutes more that you will not be hooked up to the cart. And so I hope you're making the most of this tiny bit of rest you're getting.
Yeah. So tell me, I mean, there's the empathetic, you know, problem, and that we have to like try to relieve. What has PETA done to help these animals?
Well, the villagers are desperately poor, and there's no getting around that. I mean, I've been to these encampments where the sugarcane workers who use the bullocks set up shop. They have their families with them because their families have to work too, maybe picking something in the fields or what have you, but working as coolie labor. And they eat maybe a chapati, a piece of bread, basically, a chapati over the fire and an onion for their dinner, and that's it. I mean, they are that poor. So obviously they can't afford veterinary care, and they can't afford to slow down if the bullock isn't feeling well or is injured. So they push them so that they can get the maximum. We have instituted a program to convert the sugarcane factories and the donkey brick kilns where the donkeys work in backbreaking labor to e-tractors, environmentally sound tractors. You can load all the bricks and all the sugarcane that you want in the world on these tractors, and they don't feel a thing. And actually, they carry more than any donkey or bullock can carry. And the people earn more because they move faster than donkeys and bullocks. So it's very much a win-win situation. It costs a lot of money, takes a lot of education, and what we try to do is push so a whole factory, and so far we've had 5, go completely 100% bullock free.
And what happens to the bullocks? I mean, do they then go out to pasture and live a more idyllic life?
Well, no. I mean, there's a nasty part to it, but it's less nasty than what would happen to them. What would happen to them ordinarily is they would be worked literally until an inch from death, and then they would be sent in a horrible ride that I have followed myself to slaughter, sometimes taking 3 or 4 days to get there, no food, no water, and then being killed, no pre-stunning or anything. That's what would happen to them if we didn't intervene. If we mechanize a whole factory, that is tens of thousands of bullocks who have no work there. Their people are now using mechanized haulage vehicles, and so they won't buy another bullock. So we reduce the number of bullocks who are at the marketplace, at the auction, and who will die that bad death. But for those who, the thousands and thousands in one factory alone, most of them will not retire. They'll go somewhere, they'll be sold, they'll be used elsewhere. Some we do take in to our sanctuary, especially if we see that they're injured or they're in bad shape and the person is willing to let them go and retire, and then they are happy as can be. They kick up their heels, Emil. They form friendships. They have little cliques. They go around together. They have environmental enrichment, and they cannot believe their luck.
Yeah, and you've seen that. You've seen them. You've witnessed this. Imagine a life of drudgery, and then suddenly you're free to be, your being. It's got to be so liberating.
Oh, the donkeys roll in the sand at the sanctuary and kick up their heels. And eventually they go to another of our sanctuary friends in the Nilgiri Hills, which is this beautiful part of India with hills and turf. It's a perfect walking surface for them. The weather is beautiful. So, yes. And the bullocks are they get the nose rope taken out from their nostrils. And the first thing they do is they lick their noses as much to say, oh, it's gone, it's gone. That perpetual reminder of servitude has been removed. and they can have water whenever they like it. They've never had that before. They can have great fodder when they want to eat. They've never had that before. And they can walk freely, and they're even groomed by the caretakers, and they form bonds with them too. It really is. The horses from the circus, the camels that we take away who are about to be sacrificed for the Eid, the celebration of Eid. We've rescued so many, and they are all on the Animal Rahat website. That's RAHAT, Animal Rahat. And you can see them. They're having a blast. And of course, we are so happy that no animals will replace them.
Ingrid, you grew up in India, and I would guess PETA's work there is particularly meaningful to you. How did your experiences as a child influence your work there today? Does it connect you with your youth?
Very much so, Emil. I was there from the time I was 7.5 years old till when I was almost 16. And of course, it's a huge influence in my life. I would see the bullocks, and in fact, one of the very first memories I have is of stopping a man when I was about 7 or 8, maybe, stopping a man from beating this bullock. It was a terrible thing, and I ran out onto the road and grabbed the stick from him. I saw cruelty all the time. My mother worked as a volunteer for human charities like Mother Teresa and the leper colony, unwed mothers. But she had a big heart for animals too. So we always stopped the car when we saw a starving dog or some other problem and tried to help. So I said to myself, when I'm grown up, I'm coming back to India and I'm going to do something for these animals. And then I forgot about it for some years, went back, saw it again, and thought, PETA can help this. Yes, so we opened up in India, and it's just been fabulous.
You know, one of the things I've started doing is meditation that goes along with my veganism, strengthened my mindful eating. Did your life in India expose you much to meditation at all?
No, it didn't. I had many friends who were Jains. Of course, the majority of my friends were Hindus, and most were vegetarian. Some of the Jains were actually vegan, but we didn't call it that then. And they had things that they wouldn't eat after the sun went down, so as not to get insects in the flames of the cooking fires, and all sorts of wonderful things that they did that were considerate of animals. But it really was, I was a little English girl growing up in a little English enclave, and I didn't really get that lesson from them. I just thought, well, that's how they are. It was only later in life when I started to read Rabindranath Tagore, the wonderful poet and philosopher, and those kinds of things that I started to open my eyes to what I had learned or what I had heard and should have learned from in the past.
Tell me also, India's in the news because of COVID, and it's impacted PETA's operations there somewhat, or has it? Or tell me about how the operation is surviving despite the things that are happening there with the pandemic.
Well, I'm glad you asked that because it has had a huge impact. Obviously, India was locked down twice. And the first lockdown came out of the blue, and the police were out on the street they have these big sticks called lathis, and they were beating people who ventured out of the home. And that was a terrible hardship because people there, they buy their food every day. They don't store. Most people don't have refrigeration or freezers or anything like that. They have to buy food every day. And suddenly there were no vendors allowed, and there was no food available, and they couldn't leave their homes or their huts or whatever they had, their corrugated sheet metal in their slums. And there are dogs, there are cats, there are other animals who live among the human beings, and suddenly their sources of food were cut off. People weren't taking the trains, so people weren't on the platforms buying from the vendors and feeding the dogs and the crows and the cats there. Or from the roadside stands, where often cows get their food. So we got a special emergency order for PETA India to allow our people to go out and feed animals in villages and on the streets, community animals. It's their home too. So we were out, and in fact, we are still out in many areas. We're feeding hundreds of animals a day in various spots around Maharashtra. And we managed to get the government to say, yes, other emergency feeders had permission to go out onto the streets to feed the animals. So that was great. Unfortunately, because India is so populated, very, very hard for people not to intermix with each other and to keep the virus at bay. And so we have had people come down with it in our office. We've had people come down with it in our sanctuary. We had 2 of our workers at one of our sanctuaries come out of the hospital last week. Luckily, everybody has survived, but not everybody's relatives have survived.
Yeah. So, well, I'm glad you've updated us because I've seen the headlines and I know of PETA's work, and I know that it had to be impacted somewhat. You mentioned dogs and cats. Ingrid, tell me about the work in Romania. It does involve dogs and cats primarily. What are the issues for these animals there in that country, and how did you get involved in Romania?
Well, PETA Germany is sort of a neighbor of Romania, and PETA Germany deals with a pretty affluent society, whereas Romania has a great deal of poverty. There are people who are living in hovels. And again, the situation is that they don't have the money to feed or provide veterinary care for animals. There are many, many kind people in Romania who are taking animals in, and they have more than they can really feed or cope with. And the municipal shelters are atrocious by and large. They're really awful. The dogs would probably be better off on the street, and that's saying something. It's also, of course, very cold in winter, and so dogs who are chained out as guard dogs suffer terribly. And so PETA Germany decided that we would put our little toe into Romania and see if we could help. And now we do have a large program that goes out, mobile units, and we find animals living with impoverished people, which isn't hard to do, and we help fix them. We provide veterinary care. We provide medicines. In summer, we provide flea and tick medicine, just as we do in the impoverished areas of North Carolina. We do everything that we can, and that program is growing by leaps and bounds. We have veterinarians who are helping us with surgeries, and we are trying to get the government to stop just rounding up animals and throwing them together into these compound pens in their own filth where they fight. And so we are having legislative initiatives to get the government to provide decent care for animals who are taken off the streets as well.
And so this is in Romania. It's funny, 1989, that's when the dictator Ceausescu fell in Romania, and conditions are, I don't know how much better they are now, but certainly not well for the cats and the dogs, and PETA's there. 89, also a big time in Asia. We had Tiananmen Square and the protests there, and PETA Asia is doing a lot of work, especially in the Philippines, where they rescue horses and dogs and pigs and cats and other animals after the Taal volcano, which you mentioned earlier. And a lot of those animals are in homes, and some for the first time in their lives. But PETA Asia's work there also involves animals who, along with humans, live among the headstones and tombs at a large cemetery, which always struck me because it's in the Philippines, and I'm of Filipino descent. How did the effort to help these animals come about there, and what does it involve?
Well, we've got a little office in Manila. Of course, it's closed now due to COVID, but our people are still working. They're just not able to go to the office. But we, again, have permission to be on the street, and thank goodness we do, because there are scant opportunities for anybody to come out and get help for animals. A lot of animals in these cemeteries, and we've moved on now from the major cemetery in Manila. We are now working in 2 other cemeteries. And as you know, Emil, a lot of poor people, unemployed people, live in the cemeteries among the headstones, as you say. They've set up their homes, and you can see actually on the PETA.org website the really striking photographs of whole families with their cats and their dogs living on tombs. And they've put up little gates around the tombs, and they're hanging their laundry and so on. But they love their animals by and large, but they just don't have the money. So we've been going into the cemeteries and talking to people, giving them flea medicine again, and cleaning dogs' ears if they have infections. We've got mange medicine, because mange is rife, and there's nothing worse probably than itching all night, not being able to sleep because your skin is crawling. So we treat all those things. We gain the confidence of the people because they're afraid we're coming to take their animals away, and they're all they have. And what we do is set up clinics, and we bring in veterinarians, get a space, maybe a local school, and we sterilize maybe 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 animals at a time. And the people are there to take them back to their tomb or whatever it is at the end of the day, and everybody is extremely happy. But it's a wonderful service. And of course, as you know, we also pick up animals who are in terrible condition, who've been hit by vehicles or starved or who are about to be eaten. And we have a foster home program. We have an adoption program. And we do the very best we can for them all.
So the thing that you would do outside of the PETA Norfolk headquarters, you also do in Romania, in the Philippines, wherever, in India?
In Mexico, yeah. We've just spayed, I think it's 500 and some, maybe close to 600 dogs and cats for people in Mexico who otherwise couldn't afford it. And every one of them got their rabies vaccine and were examined to make sure they didn't have other things that needed treatment. And if they did, we treated them. But yeah, we have found homes for animals who were abandoned on the streets in Mexico. And we're just, wherever we feel we have to be, we are. And in other cases, of course, we support other groups who might be small, but they're there somewhere, maybe in Thailand, maybe in Greece, somewhere trying to make a difference.
Well, PETA is global, and in just this conversation, we've been to Romania, Norfolk, Virginia, Mexico. Let me just return to the Philippines just for a second, because now this is something, the stereotype of some Asian cultures is that they eat their dogs, but PETA is making an impact in that. I think I heard this, and you can verify this, that there has been a drop in people taking their dog or their pets or their, these animals to a butcher, so that it shows that people see them as animal companions, and that PETA has had an impact on people making the cultural shift that these are, in fact, members of the family.
You're absolutely right. And one of our big thrusts is the Compassionate Citizen program, which is not only for kids, although the bulk of it goes to school children, teaching them to be empathic, teaching them that a difference in how you look or how you sound or where you come from or what your language is or anything really doesn't justify ever bullying or mocking or being mean to, hurting or killing someone else. And one of those someone else's might be a dog or a cat. In Jordan, where we also work, it would be maybe a donkey or a camel. Those animals are treated abysmally at Petra, which many tourists have visited. If you go to see the great wonders of the world, you may have gone to see Petra and the temple there and so on. And there are about 600 animals there at any given time, maybe more, who are really so abysmally treated, and they're forced to climb up 900 stone steps, all crumbling steps with tourists on their backs. And the kids who run these donkeys and camel rides have no compassion for the animals at all. That's not how they grew up. So yes, we are influencing people to think of animals as not food, not a meal on the hoof, not some thing that's going to be made into a part of your jacket, and not some vehicle that you can just push beyond endurance. We have kids who, in Jordan at Petra, have thrown donkeys off the cliff for fun. We have a case the other day where they tied a dog to a donkey's tail, and of course that doesn't have a happy ending. And they bash the animals on the heads with stones and hit them with whips because they want to show that they have power over something, someone else. And we are there saying, hang on, these are your brothers and sisters. These are your fellow inhabitants of the earth. These are thinking, feeling beings. And so compassionate citizen reaches owners, guardians, kids, and says, can you rethink this? Because this is who animals are.
And it really is a global approach because it's a constant education that needs to happen until we all get it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look back at things that I grew up thinking, and I thought that I was extremely kind to animals. I would never do anything cruel, but we ate animals. I had my first fur coat when I was 19. I had a fur hat that I actually bought with my pocket money in Kashmir that was made of a wild cat's fur. And I thought it was great. And in Delhi and in other places, I would always choose to take the horse-drawn carriage if there was an opportunity. I rode elephants, I rode camels, never had a thought that this was connected to being cruel. And of course, now we know that the elephants are taken away from their parents when they're tiny and they're broken, worse than being in the Marine Corps. They're broken with fire and sticks, and they're intimidated and they cry because elephants do weep. And all these animals don't want to be there. They're not volunteers. And it didn't dawn on me, and I cared deeply about animals. So it's great now to have materials, the internet, resources, the Compassionate Citizen program, and get it into schools, get it into kids' hands, change mindsets, change the way that my generation grew up thinking about animals in compartmentalized kind of ways.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a key word there, generation, and this is a kind of birthday interview that I do with you on an annual basis, it seems, on our podcast. And I get it. The focus is always on the animals, but I know you do things for fun. Like, I know a fun fact about you is that you love auto racing. I know you love race. What is it about the race cars? Is it the speed, the danger? What is it that makes it fun for you?
I love driving. I drive much too fast. Some people say, oh, I can't ever drive with you again. You step about. But this might go back to Emil too, to being brought up in India. In India, there usually aren't lines dividing lanes in the road. Yeah. Everybody, it's a free-for-all. And everybody has on the back of their vehicle, honk, please, meaning, I don't know where you are. Let me know. So it's chaotic, it's noisy, and people are zigzagging and weaving. For these formative years of my life, I wasn't driving, but I was in vehicles going through this, and I think that's stuck in my head. I did marry somebody when I was 19 who was involved in racing, and it was a mutual interest. So when I moved to Maryland, we actually had a racetrack around our house. Wow. And in the early hours of the morning, police cars would come and for fun race around it with their sirens on. So I am very sad that I have not been able to go to the races because of COVID. There are many more things to be sad about with COVID than this. for 18 months or so, because occasionally I do like to go at least once or twice a year. But may I say this?
Yeah.
I have been able to get, and this is why I'm just so happy about racing, some of the top drivers in Formula One have taken action for animals at our request. Michael Schumacher, who is the greatest Formula One champion ever, helped us to stop experiments on monkeys in Germany. He helped us when there was Hurricane Katrina and we were doing rescues. He adopted a dog called Flo when he was in Sao Paulo. And we have had foie gras, which of course comes from force-feeding ducks and geese. We got that taken out of most of the Formula One teams' very la-di-da events for their sponsors. And we got the head of Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone, his daughter, to pose to say, rather go naked than wear fur.
Wow. So, all right. So Formula One, I would, there might be a slight debate who was greater, Jackie Stewart or, Graham Hill or, the guy that you're saying is the great. Well, all right. That's another debate. But here's another.
The Formula One champion today is Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
And he is vegan. And he is a great advocate for animals. He's not just a health vegan, he's an ethical vegan. And so that's wonderful to hear from him.
And that's a big deal. Now, all right, here's my question about one more race question. Have you discovered motorcycle racing?
I don't want to, Emil, because one obsession with a hobby kind of thing is enough, and I have to work animal rights into it. I have not got time to take on football, basketball, motorcycle racing, rollerblade, anything. Go away.
I'm just telling you, when you see those 150-pound guys steering that 400-pound machine leaning around, the turn, it makes it looks like it makes auto racing look like Surrey racing.
Well, Surrey racing looks terrible, so I don't take that well.
All right, just a couple more. I know you read a lot. Is there anything you're reading that you want to mention?
Sure. I mean, I have the opportunity to read so many books that come in and comment on them. There's Peter Singer just came out with a novel, which is very interesting. I think you had him on the show.
Yes.
And it's called The Golden Ass. It's a little bit bawdy, but it is believed to be the first animal rights-oriented novel that was ever written. It's Greek. It was translated from the Greek, I believe. But at the moment, one of my favorite books that I am having a hard time getting through because I keep going back and reading more and then reflecting on it is a book that's been reissued. It's by Jim Mason. Huh. It's called An Unnatural Order. And it's got a chimpanzee on the front who's looking very thoughtful. An Unnatural Order. And the subtitle is The Roots of Our Destruction of Nature. And it is fascinating, historically, factually, and so on. It's not necessarily cheery, but it really gives you some tremendous insight. I also, rereading, as my bedside list of books, or stack of books is quite substantial. In addition to, I do read a lot of books about the Middle East, because we're in Petra and I'm fascinated with the Middle East. I'm reading a science book by John Gluck called Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals. And you just have to fall in love with John Gluck. What a wonderful ethical scientist he is. Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals. And he knows of what he speaks because he worked as an animal experimenter until it dawned on him that what he was doing was not productive, not useful, not contributing to human health, and was unethical. It was horrible for the animals.
Yeah, and we've had John on the podcast. I forget the podcast number, but people can find it wherever they podcast. It was a fascinating interview. He tells his story about how he discovered his ethics as a vivisector. and how it changed his life. So it's good that you mentioned that book and that you mentioned all the books that you're reading. I want to just toss in Helgoland, which is about quantum mechanics for non-physicists, and it helps you understand the metaphor of how we see things and how things are relative. But see, now you've given us all a gift, a reading assignment as a gift for your birthday.
They are good, and I won't read anything that's too depressing, so you can be all right with them. But I must also plug Gunda, the movie, which if anybody saw Okja and thought that was great, Gunda is very different because it's a documentary. It's Gunda. It's about a real-life pig, and the pig chose the filmmaker, not the other way around. And the filmmaker is just the dearest person. The story is Gunda, and it is the real-life story of this pig he meets, and he gets to see her personality. It's a wonderful, wonderful film.
And it's it's streaming online, I gather?
Yes, I can't tell you which platform, but if you internet search Gunda, Gunda, you'll find it.
God, another gift from Ingrid on your birthday. You've given three books and a movie, and I just mentioned motorcycle racing and Helgoland. That's all I brought to the party.
Well, no, you didn't sing happy birthday to me, which is also a blessing, I think, from what I hear. But also, I just wanted to thank anybody who's listening who contributed to our work for animals overseas or in any way as a present for me for my birthday. Couldn't wish for a better present than that. It's just wonderful to see. Thank you.
Well, that's great. And, I did have one other question, and that is, what will be your vegan birthday meal that we should all emulate on our birthdays? Oh, well, Ingrid did it this way. We're going to do it this way. Do you have a special vegan birthday meal?
I do, and I know the restaurant I'm being taken to. It's a treat for me. I adore it, and it's too expensive for me ever to pay for myself. But they have something I've never seen anywhere else. I'm sure it does exist, but it's a Beyond Steak dinner, and it's Beyond Steak with roasted Brussels sprouts, roast potatoes, and there is a vegan flan for dessert.
A vegan flan. So you're gonna go meat and potatoes on your birthday. Beyond meat and potatoes on your birthday.
I am, because I'm of the age where I grew up with roast beef and mashed potatoes or roast potatoes, and I grew up with lamb chops and so on. I'm mortified that I didn't connect the dots, but that was what my palate adjusted to, and I am so delighted. Beyond makes just about any taste that you could want. And I like fish. And of course, we've now got Easy Catch and Gardein fish fillets and all these fabulous things that you don't have to hurt any animal for.
Yeah. And I was just reading something in the paper the other day that said that all the artificial versions, COVID has been good for all these, Beyond and, these companies that are making substitutes. People don't have to eat animals. They don't have to eat or harm animals for their meals. And I think it's the trend. It's the coming thing.
Oh, it's a huge, wonderful investment for people to make, and people have learned a lot and they've moved away. I think part of it is that a lot of these products don't have to be refrigerated. You can get oat milk and almond milk and all those things. And during the initial food shortages, people were stocking up, and they could realize they could take all this plant milk and just shove it in the cupboard. They didn't have to have fridge space for it. And then they came to love it, and they realized it was better for them and for cows. But there was just an article called Plant-Based Diet Can Slash Severity of COVID-19. That was a major study, and I think people will also pick up on that because it showed, it was in either the Journal of the American Medical Association or one of those, and it shows that 73% lower odds of experiencing a moderate to severe case of COVID-19 if you're on a plant-based, in other words, vegan diet.
Yeah, well, definitely whole food, plant-based, no oil has changed my life, and I've kept off pounds, I've stayed healthy, and I wouldn't have thought that 40 years ago when I was just a regular guy, regular Filipino guy eating Filipino food. And now here I am talking to...
We hadn't a clue. And now we know.
Now we know. And now here I am speaking to Ingrid Newkirk, the president, founder, co-founder of PETA. And on her birthday week, I thank you for just the opportunity to do these podcasts and also to talk to you on this birthday week. And happy birthday to you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, Emil. All the best.
Yeah. And yes, and enjoy your Beyond Steak.
I will.
Okay. And
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I think red goes well with that too. Red.
Maybe that or a Negroni.
Oh yeah, Negroni. Okay. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ingrid Newkirk, president and co-founder of PETA, on her birthday week. Having a few Negronis, I suppose. That's gin, vermouth, Campari with a twist over ice. And, of course, no animals harmed. None are harmed at PETA.org. Check it out. That's PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Hey, thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. I mean, they can hear from Ingrid herself. Hey, tell them you like the PETA podcast. Yeah, and you can contact us at PETA.org. Find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.